Welcome to my review of Shinobi Grata, and this is for the Switch. And this game is on a few different modern platforms, so it's pretty easy to play. It took me around, I believe, 6 hours, 7 minutes to beat. And this is a game in the style of Ninja Spirit, an old arcade game that was also ported to a few consoles, and that was one of my favorite, old Ninja games from back in the day. And I would say that this game improves on that gameplay, and it plays even better with more weapon choices, better flow to the gameplay overall. So in that sense, I would say that the game is better. And the art style looks good too, but it's more of an 8-bit kind of look to it. Whereas Ninja Spirit kind of looked more like a 16-bit game, even though maybe it was technically an 8-bit arcade game, but it had more of a, Genesis type of look or something like that. But this looks a little bit more NES style. And, the music I think is decent, but nothing that stood out for me. So as far as the soundtrack and visuals, I like Ninja Spirit much better from those standpoints. But I feel like this gameplay is much improved. So if you're not familiar with Ninja Spirit, this is pretty much a game where you're moving either left to right, or you're descending or climbing. But you're always trying to get to the end of the stages, and there's usually several bosses in a stage. And the way the checkpoint system works is every time you beat a boss, you get a new checkpoint, which means that there are no lives or anything in the game, and the game does save. So it means if you shut the game off and go back to it, you'll be able to choose continue and restart at the last checkpoint you got to, which will be after you defeated a boss. That's the only time that checkpoints appear in the stages. Other than that, you do have to get through each section without dying, but you can take 5 hits and you'll get some health back sometimes through crates and things like that. So the goal, of course, is just to take everything out, or not even take everything out. Most of the time the goal is to move all the way to the next area. But sometimes you will have these little arena type battles where you do have to clear everything out, like a certain number of enemies before you can proceed. But most of the time you're just busting through trying to get to the bosses. So it's a really fast-paced action game. And, great action. So here I'm showcasing some of the bosses in different sections. So this was a cool boss fight. You have to manage a lot of minions while you're dealing with the main boss. So this was a cool one. And the biggest challenge of the game can be some of the boss fights. That's why it took me over 6 hours. And it's really not that long of a game. The game, I'd have to look it up again, but the full game might be between 30 and 60 minutes when you edit out all the deaths. But it's not a long game, but it can take a little while because it's a challenging game. Some of the boss fights are tough. So you have 6 different special weapons that you can kind of swap between at any time by hitting the bumpers on the controller. You can also slice in pretty much any direction. So you can do that while you're airborne. So the control is a lot better than Ninja Spirit. It gives you a lot more control and freedom of movement. The jumps aren't super high like Ninja Spirit. It's more balanced. I think you have a double jump as well. It just plays better. Now sometimes those limitations that are built into those old games, are part of the gameplay and strategy involved. So it's not always a bad thing, but it feels very good, very fluid. And you can switch between all the different special weapons on the fly. So one of the best ones is the bombs that you throw, because they'll stick onto enemies and they do a lot of damage to most of the bosses. The shotgun can also be very strong against certain enemies. So those are probably the 2 best, but there's uses for the other ones. Now some of them I barely used, but I did like that little Asian symbol one because it clears projectiles off the screen. So that can get you out of some bad situations. There is a homing lightning, which is okay. It's good for one particular boss that I remember. Maybe a few bosses it works well on. But I didn't use it that much. There's also a long chain weapon that you'll rarely ever see me use, but I may have used it once or twice in the whole game. Then there's shurikens. The shurikens are I think pretty weak little projectiles that I never used. But it is an option. The long chain can be good for taking out groups of enemies, but it's kind of weak. So here you see me fighting, the boss. It's like these 2 fucking balls that you got to damage. I think the homing shot actually works good for this boss. So this was one of the rare exceptions where I used it. So aside from that, there's a lot of creative uses for the weapons, but I find myself mainly using the bombs and shotgun were the main things I used. There are no difficulty levels or anything like that. It's just like the game is what it is. But I could see it being a very good game for speedruns, things like that. And it's just a very good action game if you like these old style games. Very easy to recommend. One of the better ones for sure. You also have an invincible dash where you can roll along the ground and you'll be invincible within that dash. But of course you can get hit as you're coming out of the dash. But yeah, this was kind of a tricky little boss fight. You do have to dodge. The patterns do get faster, but you're basically just memorizing a bunch of different patterns. And I will link the tutorial in my description. I did make a tutorial for this explaining all my strats. So you can check that out if you want some further content on the game or if you're trying to beat it. So this is the final chapter. I'm not sure if I show the whole final chapter, but you'll definitely see some good pieces of it. I may show the full thing, including the last bosses and all that. But I have to see how I edited this. I did edit this a little while ago. I try to edit these videos in advance and have multiple videos ready that I could just comment over, So sometimes they do sit for a little while. So these bosses, these little mini enemies, they're like mini bosses, but you fight two of them at the same time here, and they can be one of the tougher enemies that can deplete your health pretty easily. I'm sure there's a better way to fight them, but it was always a sloppy mess for me. I never really figured it out. I got through it, but I would always take a lot of damage. So this is one of those scenarios where you're locked into an arena, basically, and you can't move forward until you destroy 8 of these magicians. So there's things like that, where you get locked into a little arena fight type of thing. Most of the time, you're just running around or falling or just moving freely, and you don't get locked into the screen like that. But there are like a few little arena battles like that, if you want to call them that. So this is your first boss of the final stage, and this one was easy with the bombs. But cool fight. The enemies and bosses and everything are very cool looking. I like the design a lot, but I wouldn't put it up there with the art style of like Ninja Spirit or the music of that game is fucking great. But of course that's not a gameplay thing, but it does kind of, it does affect the enjoyment of the game. I do enjoy the atmosphere of Ninja Spirit a lot more, so it is something that I would come back to just for the feel of the game. But the gameplay here, I think, is far superior to Ninja Spirit and better balanced as well. It doesn't have, like Ninja Spirit, I've beaten multiple versions of that game, pretty much all the ports, including the arcade version, which has this really disgusting fucking falling sequence at the end of the game where you have really laggy control while you're falling, so it's super delayed, and you die in one hit, and you can't attack the enemies. It doesn't do anything. So it was an insane like bullshit sequence of trying to memorize as much as I could, but it all looks the same. So eventually, after hours of grinding that scene, I broke through and got to the final boss. But I thought it was a fucking shit sequence, I complained about it a lot. Never made a tutorial for that version of the game, but that was before I had recording capabilities. But this game doesn't have anything like that that's super fucking cheap or anything. It's all very well done. Ninja Spirit was great up until that point. That's the one thing I don't like about the game. It made it an interesting fucking game to beat. But that's about it. But this game is still challenging. It's definitely not as hard as Ninja Spirit is for the arcade, and especially with that falling sequence, but it's still a challenging game. And this is one of the harder bosses that takes a while. You got to get the patterns down. So this boss can be tricky. But there's really nothing super hard if you're accustomed to these kind of games. But yeah, it will be very hard for players that haven't beaten these kind of games, like 8 and 16-bit type of games or harder indie games. If you're kind of new to these kind of games, then it's going to be a challenging one for sure. But I still think that new players would enjoy it a lot, trying to learn it. I feel like it's still very approachable, but it just may be very challenging, depending on your skill level. But I think it's worth playing for all players that like action games. I was definitely surprised with this one. I definitely thought it was one of the better like indie action games in this style for sure. It really stood out. It definitely wasn't one of those games that's like, it feels like just another clone or just a moderately decent action game. Like, no, this felt like really fucking good. Like, probably better than Ninja Spirit from a gameplay perspective. So, I mean, that's saying a lot because, I love Ninja Spirit. So you got some power-ups as well, like these multiple clones. And, you can pick up some health and shit like that. The meter below your health shows how many special moves you have, but you can replenish that by killing enemies and picking up these little blue spirits. So now we got fucking Goku over here. This is a cool boss fight. So you're mainly trying to target the main guy, like the clone. Damaging him doesn't do anything really, so you want to mainly just damage the main. But this was a cool boss fight. I think I beat this on my second try, this boss, for some reason. My friend had a lot of trouble with it, but see, I'm a more aggressive player, so some things that are easy for him are hard for me. Like, I'm not good at endurance battles with a lot of patterns. It takes me a while to get them down. But when it comes to aggressive and precise kind of gameplay, I can take out bosses fast sometimes. I'm kind of good with that. But so for this was an easy one for me. But the previous boss probably took me over an hour. And, he didn't take that long on it. So, different. Every player has different strengths and weaknesses. It's kind of interesting to see what parts players struggle on and stuff. Because he's definitely a very skilled player as well. And I've played through thousands of these fucking games, or thousands of games in general, but a lot of different types of games. So you got these little mini bosses here, which are easy to take out once you kind of know how to take them out fast. You just keep right out of range of their sword and slash them. I'd much rather deal with those guys than the other mini boss ones that I mentioned that gave me a lot of trouble. These guys on the ground here with their swords, they always gave me a lot of trouble. I'm sure there's an easy way to take them out, but they always fuck me up. But, I knew I was going to break through. I would get past it sometimes, so I knew I would break through eventually and finish off the rest of the game. But I probably should have got a better strat for those guys. So now this is the final boss. And this one also didn't take me too many tries. Because this is one that if you're an aggressive player and pretty precise, you can do a lot of damage. Especially if you're tagging bombs on its face. So, a little fucking pro tip there. And if you take out the angels, you'll collect some more power-ups for your special moves. So therefore you can tag more bombs onto this thing's face. So that's it. But cool final boss fight. It's fun. It's kind of exciting and nice little finish to the game. But the game as a whole is great. Great fucking game. Really enjoyed this one. I'd probably give it an 8.5 out of 10. I just thought it was a great game. It's on that great level. If you have any questions, let me know, and thanks for watching.